So I would say from my own experience, divorce is a terrible thing.
Yeah.
But it's not the end of the world. Divorce is a tragedy. I would name it as such.
I would agree.
But in every tragedy, God is present, just as he is in every moment of joy and everything in between. And grace is presented even then and there.
People often wonder who we are. Why do we dress this way? What do we do all day? Why do we live this kind of life? What does it mean to be a sister, a priest, a Catholic? We want to help you navigate life through faith to find the truth of God and all his glory, because the truth shall set you free.
Welcome back to our podcast, and the truth shall set you free. And today I can hardly stay in my seat. I am just so excited about my friend who is here that now will be your friend as well. We've known each other for a number of years. We've prayed each other through some very interesting situations, as everybody understands. That's the power of prayer. That's the power of God-given friendship. So today, I want to say how excited we are to have Father Brian Tabor, S.J., yes, he's a Jesuit, with us. And it's just such a gift to have you here, Father. So, Father, so that everyone I don't think I have ever told you this, but it's striking me more and more. Audience, you agree with me. You look like Fulton Sheen. But I'm just saying, and when he speaks, especially in a homily or spiritual direction of some sort, you will pick that up too. We'll get to our friendship later, okay? But for now, Father, tell us where you were born, how you were raised, how God dealt with your life to bring you where you are now.
Sure. Well, thank you, first of all, sister. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you, and I do greatly treasure your friendship and all the prayer.
Thank you.
And
You're not kidding.
The incredible work you and your sisters are doing. Wouldn't be where I am today without your help, your aid, and your
God
intercession.
love you.
So, as to your question, I'm from Eastern Iowa. My hometown is a little place called Bluegrass, which is
I like that. I like that kind of music sometimes too.
It's good music.
Yes, I think so.
There wasn't much bluegrass music there, though. It just happened to be named after the grass itself, Kentucky bluegrass, even though it's in southeastern Iowa.
Neat.
It's just kind of a small town about 12 miles south of Davenport.
Oh.
And Davenport's really where I did most of my growing up. That's where I went to school. That's where the parochial schools were. And that's where I went to high school, Assumption High School in Davenport, Iowa.
Oh, okay.
My father, of all things, was an English teacher, high school English teacher.
That's where you get it. You're very good with words.
Well, that's part of it. He drilled in a few good lessons, and I still refer to him for a great deal of grammar help.
Oh, how neat.
So he taught in a school actually just across from Illinois, Moline High School. And I grew up in what I would say a pretty ordinary family, at least in the late 80s, early 90s.
Okay.
2 brothers, 1 older brother, 1 younger brother. And through most of my young life, church is just part of what we did. We went to Catholic school.
Father,
Yeah.
can you pause there? Did
Sure.
you hear what Father just said? Church was just part of what we did. How normal is it when God is just part of life because we need him? Just what we did. Father, that's the most beautiful statement for your parents.
And I honestly, I feel absolutely blessed by this now, but when I was growing up, I didn't reflect on it too much. What do you do?
You and most other children.
You go to Mass on Sundays and holy days. During the summer, my dad being a school teacher, sometimes we just go during the week because we had the time, especially on Saturdays. We'd go to confession quite regularly, learned how to pray the rosary at home. My godfather was very much involved in my life and really took seriously his role in being a spiritual guide and mentor. And he had a very strong devotion to the Blessed Mother.
Oh, thank you. Wow, and that influenced you.
It did. I mean, my brothers and I would build a May altar.
Oh, how dear.
And there was a traveling statue to the Blessed Mother, Our Lady of Good Hope, that would go around the diocese. And my godfather would procure it on our behalf, and it would go from his house down to our house, usually in the month of May. And that would be a big deal. We were having a party for the Blessed Mother. And again, I just figured everyone did that. Why wouldn't you love Our Lady? Why wouldn't
you love Our Lady?
And why wouldn't you go to Mass? And why wouldn't you receive the
you?
Eucharist? I was an altar boy. I was all the normal things I associated with just going to church. And it was reinforced because everything was at the parish. The Boy Scouts were at the parish. The sports teams were all at the parish. Everything happened in and around the parish.
Father.
So you just that's your home.
What a great place to grow up. It's such a Catholic environment, such a Catholic culture. Would you say, Father, it's still very much the same? If so, we're ready to move.
Yes. I think it's a bit better there than what I've seen since joining the society. So since joining the society, I've been typically going from one fairly large city to another.
Right.
And in the larger cities, I find that the Catholic culture gets rather diffused or even in some cases supplanted by the secular culture that surrounds it. So recently, well, a couple years ago after getting ordained, I went home to do a Mass of Thanksgiving in my home parish.
By all means.
And it was not quite as what I remembered it.
Okay.
I saw the people there, and it was most of the faces of the people I know who stayed back home.
Sure.
But there were some folks who would have been there every Sunday, and you kind of had your pew, and you went to your Mass.
Yes,
and you knew
yes.
the Tallmans were going to be sitting in front of you. The Lawrences were going to be back to your right. Everyone you had to be there. Everyone knew if you were gone. And
I love that.
I was saddened to see that there were a few of my classmates from grade school and high school that apparently stopped going to Mass, but the vast majority of them still go, and they have their families, and it's still quite beautiful. I compare that with what I know of my experience doing supply work in some of the parishes in Chicago where I am now, and especially coming out of this pandemic time, a lot of families have not returned. And
I know.
That's scary.
We'll get back to that point, Father. Okay, your mom.
Mm-hmm.
What about your mom in all this? She is married to your father and has 3 sons. So tell me about your mom's role in all this.
This is where it's going to get a little complicated.
Okay.
So my mother was at home when I was young and when my older brother was young.
Okay.
And then when I got into preschool, she decided to take a job as an X-ray technician. And after about 2 years of that, she decided one day that she wanted to divorce my father.
Okay.
It was rather odd scene. We went into town and went to McDonald's on a Wednesday.
Oh.
And I remember that distinctly because we didn't go to eat all that often. And on a Wednesday, that's really unusual. And I was just really thrilled at first to get a Happy Meal, which is all I wanted. So we get our Happy Meals. I'm playing with my toys. My mother asked my father for a divorce. She says she's not feeling happy. She doesn't feel like she's really had a chance to grow up. My older brother, a couple years older than me, knew what that word meant. So he started throwing a fit, a wild temper tantrum in the middle of the McDonald's. And I have no idea what's going on. So our family kind of fell apart after that.
Okay.
My dad was kind of shell-shocked, didn't know what was going on.
Okay.
And she petitioned for the divorce. She went to court. My dad tried to fight it, but there's something called no-fault divorce, which means that if
you just get the
mom
divorce,
or dad says, I don't even need to cite a reason, just walks away. So whatever lawmakers put that together, I don't know if they had the interest of the family in mind.
Sad.
But my dad was still kind of figuring, well, something's not right here. And he loved my mom so deeply, he was just kind of waiting. He's like, things are going to sort themselves out. Whatever this is, this little existential crisis, she'll figure out that this is where she should be. Unfortunately, that never quite panned out. So he kind of kept waiting. And then
what a good man.
And that it ended up being beneficial to the relationship that I was able to develop with my father, because he kind of took on super dad roles.
Gotcha.
He was the one that picked us up at the end of the day. We'd have to wait a little bit after school as he drove from his school over to pick us up. He coached
what a good man.
Coached both my brothers and I basketball teams, our baseball teams. He pretty much did everything while he's just kind of trying to be the best dad he can. He would not tolerate us expressing any kind of chagrin against our mother. He's like, no, that is your mother.
He
laid down the law, and he never spoke in ill will, and still hasn't spoke ill of my mother, and still hasn't to this
Such
day.
integrity.
Incredible integrity.
Father, that brings up 2 points. One that I would like you to give, it's actually the second one, but some thoughts for our audience, because unfortunately, obviously, a lot of people come from broken families or already, have experienced it themselves one way or another. So I want to go back to that, because that's something a lot of people need. Any pointers you can give to how to deal with. But first of all, I also want to say that studies have interestingly shown overwhelmingly that the children in the family are more likely to be faithful to their faith if their father is, than more so than their mother. I personally think that's because we women are by nature so much more spiritual. So in any case, Father, how did your dad's example to you boys really keep in you such a beautiful faith? You've already mentioned one thing that I think is so beautiful, his fidelity to his marriage, even though it appeared to have broken apart in his heart, it didn't. And I think that fidelity is a strong witness in our world today.
So I would say my father has extraordinary virtue in a variety of different ways.
agree.
One is he is humble, and there's a great
You'd have to
strength
be.
in
You'd
his
have
humility.
to. That's beautiful.
He's very wise. I don't think I've met a man with quite as much wisdom as my father. Now, I'm biased in that remark, but he always seemed to be able to know what was going on in our lives and how to kind of help steer us through the difficulty of raising a family, particularly adolescent boys.
Yes.
And my older brother and I hated getting bounced back and forth from one house to another. We were not particularly close to my mother, who was kind of doing her own thing. And so we just constantly wanted to be with my dad. And he would kind of put that on hold on time and say, look, you need a mother. She loves you deeply.
Good man.
And even when it was hard for her to express that, he promised us that she does love us.
Isn't that? He is remarkable. You have a saint for a father.
I believe so. One in the making, maybe.
Well, we all are in the making. Okay, Father, so again, to the other issue, what would you say to, sad to say, a vast majority of the world that have in some way been impacted by divorce, be it their own, be it children of divorced, and yet you all flourished, you found your vocation, etc. So what would you say? Because that's not always an audience that we reach out to. And I'm really grateful to be able to do this in this podcast.
So I would say from my own experience, divorce is a terrible thing. But it's not the end of the world. Divorce is a tragedy. I would name it as such.
I would agree.
But in every tragedy, God is present, just as he is in every moment of joy and everything in between. And grace is presented even then and there.
Beautiful.
We flourish when we have the natural love of a family reinforced by the sacramental grace of marriage. When that is not present, God's grace, I think, is found in other ways, perhaps less obvious for some, but because my father was so attuned to that, it was still in our family. Eventually, my mother actually left entirely. She picked up and left town and decided to go to Kentucky, back to the bluegrass motif, for warmer weather. As a 12-year-old boy, I didn't quite understand that. Like, okay.
You were 12 at the time?
So most 12-year-olds probably, want a mother, even if mom wants warmer weather. So,
and you had a younger brother.
This is where the younger brother comes in. So after my mother left, my dad kind of said, okay, I'm going to let her go and do her thing. And he sought and petitioned and acquired an annulment. Okay. After which time he began to date again. Okay. And he found a woman who was in a very similar situation. Devout Catholic, her family had been torn apart. She was divorced by her husband in a similar way. She was not anticipating this. Perhaps a little more understandable. She had lost her eldest son She also had 2 boys
Ooh.
due to cancer when he was only
Ooh.
12 years old.
Oh, my goodness.
And that is sadly not an uncommon phenomenon, that the different ways people grieve the loss of a child can tear apart a family, so tragedy is compounded by tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
And here you had this lovely woman with a deep faith who was experiencing the double tragedy of losing her son and having her husband divorce her. And you had my father, who had been divorced by his wife and now has his 2 sons and no mother even around. And they found each other, and eventually they got married. And so my younger brother is actually my stepbrother, who's a year younger than me.
Really?
So we had the pleasure of going through 8th grade together and high school
Oh,
years.
seriously?
So the family actually grew. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And your brothers are doing fine today?
My brothers are doing fine today. My older brother is still back home in Iowa. He's since moved to the middle of the state, just north of Des Moines, in a town called Ankeny.
Okay.
He's doing real with her. He's married. My sister-in-law is amazing.
Oh, isn't God good?
She's a nurse, and she grew up Lutheran of all things.
Oh, my goodness.
Also kind of had a fraught family experience, but meeting my brother and dating him, she converted to the faith.
Oh.
And like so many, her fervor for the faith really kind of helped reignite my older brother's faith. He never left the church, but he was...
Gotcha.
It was like pulling teeth to remind him to go to Mass when he was in college and early out in the workforce. He's like, yeah, I go sometimes, but things get in the way. I'm like, no, nothing can get in the way between you and Jesus.
Good woman.
So she's keeping him close to the faith. My younger brother's actually in San Diego.
Oh.
He's married. He has 2 daughters and 1 son. So we went out there.
I want to meet those daughters.
Oh, yes. They're beautiful.
Good. So, Father, at what point did you start thinking of your own vocation?
So in high school, actually, and this is going to sound bizarre, I'm not sure how this happened, but the Gallup organization was commissioned by the Diocese of Davenport to conduct a survey of high school students.
Oh, how interesting.
A survey of the faith. I don't know if it was a sociological thing, a data research thing, whatever it was. It just asked some objective facts about your knowledge of the faith and then your disposition towards the faith. And apparently I scored very high on this test.
That doesn't surprise me, but anyway.
At this point, my father had always encouraged us to consider how we would serve Christ in the world. Mm-hmm. And that could be any variety of things. Being a priest was one of those options. And I just figured every boy growing up is going to be told that's one of the things you can do to serve Christ. Just like being in religious life or being married or in the single state. Whatever you're going to do so to serve Christ. So it was always on the table, but I'd never given it much thought.
Okay.
I played as a priest a few times when I was younger. But again, that's just the Catholic...
The Catholic culture, you can't beat it. Yes.
So aside from using bed sheets as chasubles, there was no vision, no mystical encounter, just really strong faith exhibited by my godfather, my father, and my grandfather as well. So I had these men in my life for whom living for the faith was very much a part of who and what they are. And then when I took this test, I was called down to see the chaplain at our high school. I'd never been called to the chaplain's office. I'm like, okay, whatever. Mother Shepley's a pretty cool guy. I'll go see what he wants. And they had handpicked the top 5 who had scored out on this survey based on whatever metric they were using. And they asked us point blank, have you ever thought about being a priest?
Good. Can our audience understand how important it is to put in the minds of young people, have you ever thought of being a priest? And young girls, have you ever thought of being a sister? Just to ask the question and to open them to whatever is God's will. Beautiful. So that struck you?
It struck me. I mean, I have to appreciate that I'm a 16-year-old boy at this time. So I just kind of like, oh, sure. The other 4 guys adamantly denied it, so they were dismissed. And I'm sitting like, did I say the wrong thing? So I had a discussion with the chaplain. I met with the diocesan vocation promoter, which I didn't even know was a thing, and had a few conversations.
Oh my goodness, it got going right then.
It got going right then, but it didn't last very long, to be honest. It was just a few months, reading some things, looking at, if you did want to go this route, there's college seminaries out there. There's ways to go serve Christ in his church. But I also kind of reflected on the life of the priest as I had experienced it. Mm-hmm. And I love the priests who were in my parishes growing up. They were just great men. And they lived right door next to the rectory, right across from the school.
Yes,
and they'd be there for
yes.
talks, and we'd go for mass, and I'd get dismissed and go serve a funeral at 10 a.m. So I would miss class and get $5. It was all great. But I also knew that
The Catholic culture can't be beat.
I also knew that those men, increasingly as I was getting older, we went from having 3 priests in the rectory to 2 to 1 by the time I was in high school. And there was just something, a knowledge I had of myself through the grace of God, that living by myself would not be the best idea. I know enough of myself, and it's clear to me now, that if I live on my own terms, I rather quickly become a tyrant. I like things to be my way.
Really?
So
none of us like things to be our way. Father, how unusual.
yeah.
Self-knowledge, how essential it is as you find your vocation, to understand who you are. And that's essential throughout life, even when we know our vocation, to be honest before God, who I am and where I'm going and how. Am I developing virtue, as you mentioned, or am I decreasing in it? Okay, Father, thank you.
So knowing that potential to be so willful, I couldn't see myself flourishing, living alone in a rectory, being kind of hyper about how things should be. And I don't think that would be very good for the people of God. I mean, it would become my parish, not Christ's parish.
Well said, Father.
I respectfully told the vocation brother for the Diocese of Davenport, like, this is what you do is amazing. I don't think I have the grace or the virtues right now to do this well. So at least for the time being, I'm going to go off to college and see what that's all about. And again, by the grace of God, I did something no other man in my family has done. I left the state of Iowa to go to college outside of state. And I went to Nebraska. I crossed the Missouri River.
Funny.
And I went to school at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska.
Okay.
So they had offered me an academic scholarship, and it seemed like a pretty good deal. And my dad said, yeah, you need to go to a Catholic school. That's where you belong. That's where things are going to be best. I grew up loving the University of Iowa, still do. Hawkeye through and through. And that's where my stepbrother went, my younger brother. My older brother went to Iowa State. And there was no way I was going to go to Iowa State.
Oh, how interesting.
I don't like the Cyclones.
Okay.
So I decided, okay, I'll do it. I'll continue my Catholic education. I'll go to Creighton University, and I'll go to the big city. I'll go to Omaha. And when I arrived there, I knew that it was a Jesuit school, but I honestly did not know what that meant.
Okay.
In high school, I'd been exposed to the Jesuits in history books. And in my mind, Jesuits were essentially like the Knights Templar, an ancient religious order that once had a great deal of authority and power and controlled the fates of Christendom, but there might be a handful of them left. Not that there are Knights Templar left, but I did not expect to really encounter Jesuits when I went to a Jesuit university of all things. That's how ignorant I was of what the Society of Jesus is.
It's actually how God was leading you in your ignorance to his providential plan.
So yeah, aside from a chapter on the Counter-Reformation in a history textbook my junior year, I hadn't thought about Jesuits a day in my life. But then first day of school, I'm enrolled in a class, an intro class on Western philosophy. And on paper, it's being taught by a professor whose surname is Hendrickson.
Okay.
And I walk into class, and the teacher presents himself as Mr. Hendrickson, but he's wearing a collar.
Oh.
And so I'm kind of confused. I'm like, Father Hendrickson? No, I'm not a priest yet. Well, what do you mean? What?
Oh.
So this was a regent, a Jesuit in formation, teaching philosophy at Creighton. He's now the president of Creighton University, Father Daniel Hendrickson.
Really?
So I was like, holy cow, this is real. There are Jesuits here, young and old and everything in between.
That is so neat.
And it just kind of rekindled something. I got to know some of the Jesuits. They do some good vocation work there. In fact, there was a discernment group on campus, and I started going to some of these discernment group meetings, and it introduced me to a religious life and a way of living for Christ that's reinforced by everything that goes on in a community. And so knowing my propensity for tyranny, this is the thing that can help soften that. I cannot live with my Jesuit brothers and just get my own way. And that is really good. For me in particular, and for the people of God especially. So I was kind of enamored of the Jesuits there, and they gave me a number of books, The Fifth Week, which kind of helps you understand the impact of the spiritual exercises as they unfold in the life of a Jesuit. And I picked up a whole bunch of biographies on Ignatius, and I started to read about the history of the society.
The great Ignatian saints, the Jesuit saints. You've got so many martyrs.
Yes. And
it's very appealing.
That was kind of the culmination of the first stages of my discernment. There were all the ups and downs of college.
Father, with that, let's put that on hold. And will you kindly consent for our audience and for myself to please come back and do a second podcast with us?
Oh, certainly.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, everybody, so you heard him promise, so he will come back. So this is part 1 of 2 parts. So you have to stay in because I didn't know him at this point in time, you see. I come in a little bit later in the divine providence of God to get to know this wonderful, wonderful priest and wonderful friend. So, Father, we want to really thank you for coming and being part of this today and sharing that. You hit on so many aspects that previous wonderful people that I have interviewed have not hit on. And again, in the providence of God, I know our audience needs to hear these things. And it's part of the world we live in. And they need to really have guidance and direction. And the word you continually used was God's grace, God's grace, God's grace. Go in it for God's grace and keep asking him in prayer. And you can watch this podcast many times again, but there will be another one. So signing off from the podcast, And the Truth Shall Set You Free. Father, thank you so very much.